Hi everybody and welcome to this week's episode of Literary Distraction with me, Hazel Gaynor, still here in lockdown in Ireland. I hope you're all doing well. We've made it to May. We're hoping to start to ease restrictions here in a couple of weeks' time, so things are definitely looking up. So hopefully you're all feeling positive and that we'll all get through this and things will be better. So thank you all for listening to all of my videos so far. It's actually been really lovely for me to reflect on the books that I've written over the past 8 years and to talk about why and how I came to write them and to hear all of you excited to read the book or to share your reaction to it if you've already read the book. So thank you for all of that. It's been lovely to read your comments. And I have another book to talk to you about this week, which is my, I've lost track at this stage. I think my sixth, let's say sixth, The Lighthouse Keeper's Daughter, which again, two different covers. So the USA and Canada, UK, Ireland, Australia, New Zealand, and I adore them both. I think they were both perfect in terms of how the covers captured the feel of the book, that really gorgeous windswept Victorian isolation of a lighthouse keeper. And oh my goodness, where do I start talking to you about why and how I wrote this book? So the starting point for The Lighthouse Keeper's Daughter was an incredible woman who I learned about at school when I was about 10. And she is known as Grace Darling. And she was a lighthouse keeper's daughter in 1838. She lived in Longstone Lighthouse, which is off the coast of northeastern England, the county of Northumberland, in a little group of outcrops really called the Farne Islands. And Grace and her family were living and working in the Longstone Lighthouse when a ship foundered on the rocks near the lighthouse. And Grace and her father rowed out in horrendous storm conditions and rescued 9 survivors of that shipwreck. And here is an artist's depiction from the era, so a Victorian artist's depiction of Grace and her father in a very small rowing boat, really, rowing out to rescue these survivors who Grace had seen from her bedroom window at the lighthouse. Now, Grace was a young 20-something woman at the time, and her story, her bravery, her heroism completely captured the imagination of England at the time. And newspaper reporters were very quick to jump on this story, and as we still see today, sort of elaborated on the details and really went to town in sharing this incredibly brave, daring account of a midnight rescue in a storm. And Grace, much to her horror, became a celebrity almost overnight. People were desperate to know, what does she look like? Who is she? What's her life like? And what I found really fascinating as a young girl, when I heard about her, she was very like Florence Nightingale, that sort of iconic Victorian woman in huge skirts and dresses, very distant and in ways unrelatable, but sort of romantic in a way. And when I came to thinking of writing her story, I started to think about it very differently, about what must that have been like for a young woman who had led a very private, very isolated life by virtue of her living in a lighthouse. And what would that have felt like to somebody of that era to have this sudden intrusion? And that was really the starting point for writing The Lighthouse Keeper's Daughter. What I discovered when I started to research more about Grace's life was that because people were so keen to see who this Victorian heroine was, several artists, local artists from Northumberland, were invited to go out to the lighthouse, which is a good couple of miles offshore, and capture her likeness. And because of the time of year this was happening, so it was September 1838 when the shipwreck happened. So, going into autumn, lots of stormy weather. So more than one of the artists who went out to the lighthouse to paint Grace's portrait got stuck there for a period of time, for up to a couple of weeks, because of the storm, and the sea conditions were too rough for them to go back to the mainland. So here I started to turn the cogs of a novelist's brain and think about, what if one of those artists was a very handsome young man whom Grace started to develop a relationship with, because she didn't really have access to many people outside her immediate family. And there were a lot of reports written about a mysterious man who was part of Grace's life, and she was very close to her sister. And there are lots of accounts of her writing to this young man, which we think may have been called George, after her amazing, daring bravery became public knowledge. So it really is based in fact, but I took that as a jumping off point and developed a fictional romance, if you like, between Grace and an artist, George Emerson, who comes to Longstone Lighthouse. What I also discovered when I was researching Grace's story was that her story wasn't 100% unique. And there was a similar story which happened over in the USA, where another young woman who was part of a lighthouse keeping tradition in her family was known for her bravery and for saving people from shipwrecks in Newport, Rhode Island, at Limestone Rock Lighthouse. And that woman was Ida Lewis. And those of you in the States may be very familiar with her name. And I came across a depiction, another image, not dissimilar to this, but just showing Grace. But on the image that I saw, it was a little cardboard set postcard, if you like. And on one end it said Grace Darling, and on the other end it said Ida Lewis. And it was almost as if the two stories had become confused and muddled, and people didn't know who this particular image depicted. Was it Grace or was it Ida? And Ida became known as America's Grace Darling. Her famous rescue actually occurred in the year that Grace Darling died. So these incredible parallels between these two women in these two remote lighthouses. And of course, I had to bring those two together. So part of The Lighthouse Keeper's Daughter is set in 1838 in Grace's era in the Longstone Lighthouse in England. And part of the story is set 100 years later at a fictional lighthouse in Newport, Rhode Island. And I have a young Irish woman, Matilda, who is sent away from Ireland by her family in disgrace when she finds herself pregnant and unmarried at the age of 19 in 1938. And she is sent to live with a mysterious, distant relative in this lighthouse in Newport, Rhode Island. And really, Matilda and Grace's stories are intertwined in how, as young women, 100 years apart, what they were expected to do, how they were expected to act, what opportunities were available to them, in many ways were different, but in many ways were very similar in how they were restricted. So there's a little mystery that is woven through the narrative in terms of one of these paintings of Grace and how it connects to Matilda. And yeah, it was just amazing to find these parallels in the story. I actually visited Grace Darling's Lighthouse. You can take a small boat out from Sea Houses, which was known as North Sunderland at the time, and you can step aboard. There's one trip that goes out where you can step aboard the Longstone Rock and go into the lighthouse. So I did stand in Grace's bedroom, terribly small, and see the window from which she first saw the shipwreck. And I also stayed in a lighthouse myself. So lighthouses really have a character of their own. And the more I wrote about them and researched the lives of lighthouse keepers, the more romantic I felt they were, and the more the lighthouses became almost a character of their own in the book. There is a lighthouse here in Ireland, not too far from where I live, called Wicklow Head Lighthouse, which is a good couple of centuries old. You can stay in it, you can rent it out to stay in it for a weekend or so. And I took my husband and my two boys as a surprise one weekend in May, a couple of years ago. And we stayed in the lighthouse. It isn't actually a working lighthouse anymore. The working lighthouse is just over the headland. So at night, you can see the sweep of the light from the working lighthouse. But you stay in the lighthouse tower, 180 steps, I think there were, from the door up to the galley kitchen at the very top where the light would have been. And it was just gorgeous. No Wi-Fi, no internet, no TV, and really nature and the weather was our entertainment. So it really helped me understand what it must have been like for someone like Grace and Matilda living in a lighthouse, being isolated, being remote, being self-reliant. And it was amazing. Now, I since learned that that lighthouse is haunted, apparently by a headless woman. So I'm very pleased I didn't know that at the time, because I don't think I'd have stayed there at all. But it's an amazing lighthouse, and there are lots of lighthouses around Ireland. And I know that you can also stay in lots of lighthouses around the coast of the United States. So just a fabulous experience. This little book also played a part in how I came to it. I don't know if you can see that. It says Grace Darling, Heroine of the Farne Islands. This little book I found in an antique secondhand bookshop in Northumberland, where Grace was from. It's the biggest secondhand bookshop in Europe, so you can only imagine how many books there are in that bookshop. And I went there with my sister while I was visiting her, when I was just starting to think about writing Grace's story, and I said to her, I wonder if this shop would have a book about her, but where on earth do you start looking? So honestly, I turned to my right, and just on a shelf in front of me was this little treasure. And it is dated, I think it's the 1875, The Life of Grace Darling, Heroine of the Farne Islands. And this is the portrait of Grace that I use to tell my story of Grace and the artist and Matilda and how they all connect. So this was a very rare find. I paid £20 for it, and it was worth every penny. So I think maybe Grace needed and wanted me to write her story. I hope so. And I had the most fabulous time researching that life. So I hope that some of you who haven't read the book will take the chance to. I've said over the last couple of weeks, whilst we're not able to leave the house really, what better way to go and stay in a lighthouse? And there's lots about the sea, the ocean, the smells, the sensory stuff connected with being at the ocean. So hopefully you'll enjoy it. And I have, of course, a copy to give away. So if you leave a comment underneath the video, anything at all, just say hello, or let me know if you've stayed in a lighthouse. Let me know if you've read the book, if you knew about Grace Darling or Ida Lewis. I love to hear connections. Leave a comment and I'll pick a winner by the end of the week and post whichever version of the book, depending on whereabouts in the world you are. I also just wanted to mention this week as well, I have a couple of giveaways happening at the moment related to my new book. So for readers in the US, and apologies for anybody else listening, it's just copyright issues. My publisher in the US at the moment is running a Goodreads giveaway to allow you to enter to win one of 100 copies of an advanced early edition of the book of When We Were Young and Brave. And at the moment, there's also a Kindle deal running for ebook readers in the US. The Girl Who Came Home, too many books. The Girl Who Came Home is currently reduced to $2.99 in ebook, and it contains a very exclusive excerpt of When We Were Young and Brave. So a couple of ways for you to hopefully get a chance to start reading the book before publication in October. And below this video, somewhere else on this page, I'm also, during Teacher Appreciation Week this week, I wanted to give readers an opportunity to nominate a teacher who they fondly remember from their past, or who's doing amazing things during this period when schools are closed. and I have a couple of copies of When We Were Young and Brave or The Bird in the Bamboo Cage to give away to one of those teachers that somebody nominates. Or if you're a teacher, nominate yourself. That book is very much based around a relationship between a young girl and her teacher when they face internment in a Japanese camp during World War II. So I really wanted to connect that to Teacher Appreciation Week. And I think so many teachers are doing so many fabulous things whilst schools are closed. So it seemed like an opportune time to say thank you. So do find that post and leave a message if you'd like to nominate someone or yourself. So I think that's it for this week. It's been great talking to you again. As I say, I really enjoy, for myself, looking back on the books and remembering the joy of and sometimes the struggle of writing them, and it's really lovely to reconnect with them. So next week will be Meet Me in Monaco, which was my second co-written book with Heather Webb. And in that book, we'll be travelling to the French Riviera to the 1950s with Grace Kelly, Princess Grace of Monaco, as she became. So loads to tell you about how we came to write and research that book. So stay tuned for next week, and don't forget to leave a comment below. And thank you all again for listening. Stay safe and see you next week. Bye.